So I think I'll ask everybody to have a seat, if you will, so that we can start on time. And thank you all for coming. This is a Common Ground for Texans meeting. And one of the things that we usually like to begin with is to recognize the fact that this has to be a civil conversation. Yes. Because sometimes there are heated issues. And so we want to make sure that we respect everybody's opinion and let every voice be heard. So I thought I would ask Dan to tell you what's going to happen in April. I will tell you what's going to happen in May.
Yeah, so on April 6th, the first Saturday of next month, we are going to have an exciting program about populism versus elitism in the world, in politics, both on the left and the right. And we have Sanford Levinson, professor of law, and Kurt Weiland, professor of government, who is a specialist in populism, will be on the panel. So look forward to that.
And in May, we are going to take part in a nationwide conversation about House Divided. So the way that will work is that we will be in circles of probably 6 or 8 folks, and we will be following a guide for a conversation about the left and the right, basically. And for us, this will be a pilot program, and we hope that in the fall it will be citywide, and it will be a much larger program depending upon the success that we have here. So you all can help me make it really successful. So without further ado, today we've asked 2 council members to come to talk a little bit about local regulation, what's too much, what's too little, and what's been in the focus lately certainly has been scooters. So we thought that we would ask Mike, as always, to moderate our conversation, and thank Jimmy Flannigan and Alison Alter to come to talk and entertain your questions. So without further ado, Mike.
Thanks, Joanne. I want to thank everyone for showing up today. You made use of this last weekend where you can move around in relative peace and tranquility, because this is the last weekend before the start of South by Southwest. How much regulation is the right amount? That is the basic question in front of us today. It's a broader question. We'll start with scooters, but we can go beyond scooters to plastic bags, what happened with the Lyft Uber situation, and so on. But as we start the discussion with scooters, I'll have our 2 guests in a moment explain what's going on. But the real question is, to start with, can a company really start an e-scooter operating program in the city without cooperation from local government? Or do they have to be licensed and regulated? And how much regulation would be appropriate in this case? We have our 2 guests here from the City Council, Alison Alter from District 10. Brief background, she's a small business owner, former professor, environmental advocate. She had her BA from Stanford in public policy and a PhD in political economy and government from Harvard. And she launched her own philanthropic advertising advising business, Alter Advising, helping individuals and families work on effective giving. Jimmy Flannigan moved to Austin to attend University of Texas. While he completed his degree, he began a small business, Site Street, building a website for student organization, and he grew into a 2 decades long enterprise. While he was at UT, he was very active in the UT band, and as the City Council website mentions and highlights this fact, he was leader of the tuba section. So, Mayor Steve Adler pointed out there's this divide in the community over these new scooter vehicles. He said everyone has been divided into 2 groups. Half the people I've run into have had a near-death experience with a scooter, and the other half can't imagine life without a scooter anymore. So this is causing some conflict. It's certainly causing issues within the community, and certainly causing a lot of debate on city council about what to do. So I'm going to now turn it over to our two city council members and ask them to explain what is the current situation with scooters, regulation, maybe a little bit of the past history, and then if they have any idea what's going to happen in the next couple of months, we'd like to get their insights on that. So we'd like to start.
Sure, I'll be happy to jump in first. So when the scooters first started appearing, I think it was last spring, last April, I don't know if I have the timeline perfect, we were in the process of creating a pilot as a city. So we have mobility goals. There was a general sense of, we want to invite these scooters in, but we wanted to do it on our own terms. We were in the process of creating this pilot and setting it up in ways that we felt would allow us to regulate, would allow us to have some time to figure out what worked and what didn't work. And in this particular instance of the market said, we don't really care if you have a pilot and you want to do it that way. We're going to jump in, and they started flooding the market with the scooters. And we didn't really have ordinances and other stuff that allowed us to respond in an appropriate way at that point in time. So we had to scramble and move forward with a lot of things which we were not ready to move forward with. And so at that point in time, we put in some temporary changes to our ordinances. We went through a process of creating rules. But the fact was that the scooter companies saw Austin as a great market for these scooters. We have a very young population, fairly compact downtown, and they kind of flooded us with that. One of the things that we did, though, through that process of when we did respond was we created a licensing process, so they now can't just come into our city without a license, without a permit. And we also created some limits on how many could be downtown without having to also serve other parts of town. Because there are some opportunities with the scooters outside of downtown, and it was important to City Council that if we were going to have these, that we wanted to explore those kinds of things. In terms of the details of that ordinance and other things, if Jimmy wants to maybe you want to chime in now and maybe talk about where we are
Sure.
at.
Well, I'm glad to be here in District 10, so on Allison's home turf.
You're
here
welcome.
in D10. Yeah, so I think it's really important to note that Austin is not the only city dealing with the scooter opportunity, we'll say. And I would argue that Austin, amongst the cities that have been focused on by these companies, has done the best job of cities across the nation. In other cities, especially right at the beginning, you would see piles of them. I mean, not just like 5 or 6 or 7, but like piles bunched up. In Dallas specifically, it was also happening with bike share, not just the dockless scooters. There were dockless bikes, but the scooters have really dominated the market there. I think the ratio is 95% scooters, 5% bikes. So it's really responding to what the market is looking for. But in Austin, I'm really proud of what we did to say not relying upon a challenging political cycle and every change having to come before the council, where you take two months off over the winter to do this, but to say to the staff, look, here's what we need. We need to get this under control. We need to find a way to regulate this so it's safe for the community, and just start iterating on these rules. And that's what we've done. It's by no means a perfect situation. There are definitely issues and concerns, but of the cities that are dealing with this, Austin has really done the best job. There are more regulations to come, for sure. But as we've started to engage with the companies directly, they've been very responsive in coming back and trying to figure out how they're going to implement some of these regulations. I mean, we have to keep in mind what happened with the Uber and Lyft situation. And thankfully, Councilmember Alter and I, neither of us were on the council when that happened. So we can watch from afar, as you all did during that timeline. But with the legislature in session, I think it's something just to keep in the back of our minds. that having a positive relationship with the companies and iterating these regulations in a way that will be enforceable and in a way that the companies will increase their financial participation, which is something that's being contemplated, I think can avoid the Uber and Lyft situation where the state just comes in and eliminates our entire ability to regulate. And that's not limited to mobility. I mean, we're seeing bills in the legislature right now that'll remove our ability to do paid sick leave, but not just paid sick leave. So what I see the legislature do, and Alison, I don't know if your experience has been the same, is if the legislature gets mad at the city of Austin for a rule we've created, they don't just eliminate that rule. They're punitive about it. They come in and say, all right, we're going to do 3 rules. We don't even care what the rules are. We're just going to come in and force you to let companies do what they want. So there is a process that I think we've done very well so far where the companies are at the table, the scooter companies are at the table, so that we can create a system of regulations that responds to the safety issues primarily, but also the accessibility issues and other things that are happening, but not tip our hand to the legislature in a way that we end up not being able to make rules at all.
If I can add to that, I completely agree that we're not the only city that's dealing with this, and in some ways Austin's dealing with it better. I think when we think about the legislature and dockless, we're in a different situation. The legislature doesn't like dockless. They banned dockless scooters from the Capitol. Most of those legislators are not going to like the scooters when they're walking around downtown, and they're falling into that camp of having those near-death experiences with the scooters. So the lay of the land with the politics, with respect to the state preempting us, is I think a little bit different for dockless than it was for Uber and Lyft, though those companies are owned by, the scooter companies are owned by the same companies, and so they may feel like they have a way forward, but I think the emotional appeal of it for the legislators is a little bit of a different dynamic. Both of us serve on the mobility committee. We've been, one of the places that the council has been addressing dockless, and I think at pretty much every meeting, partially because I've been asking for it, we've had discussions about dockless to keep the questions out there, and what is our role in the government in moving this process forward. And where we are at right now is, I think it's towards the end of this month is the plan. They're going to be bringing a new set of ordinances and regulations to us to help us do the next stage with dockless. So those need to have a safe rider ordinance, so it's going to clarify what the rules are over where you can ride, what's safe, what's not, what the penalties are. Creating an environment in which we can enforce things better. So one of the biggest challenges we have right now is that dockless is not in the transportation code at the state level, and so we have to jump through some hoops if we want to enforce laws. People don't know about the laws. There's an education component that I think will also be coming forward, and they're also going to be looking at changing up the structure for how a dockless provider gets to be able to provide their service in the city. And one of the things that's going to be on the table, and we don't have a whole lot of details at this point, we will shortly, is perhaps creating a franchise system. So we would have fewer players. They would have more of an incentive to invest in Austin to get things right, so that we might have higher quality scooters. We might be able to charge higher fees so that they can contribute to the infrastructure through this process. It paves the way for a positive thing to come out of the dockless, which is increased funds coming into our bike and pedestrian infrastructure. So they're using our infrastructure, they're using our right-of-way, and right now they're paying pennies for what they're getting out of those things. And so we would be drastically increasing the kinds of fees in concert and in conversation with these providers, which would then allow us to have funding, additional funding to fill out our infrastructure. So if this is a topic that's of interest to you, there's definitely going to be a lot of things moving in the next few weeks or few months. I'm not exactly sure of the timing on different pieces of this. There are legal elements of the liabilities that also need to be enforced. And one of the things I think that they're hoping from, we still haven't gotten a full explanation of how the franchise system would work, but what they're hoping is by working more in concert and having them have an investment in Austin, will be able to have conversations over geofencing, conversations over liabilities, conversations over them finding their own scooter riders if the scooters get found on trails where they're not supposed to be. One other piece of the scooter saga that we experienced is that there was an introduction of scooters to some of the urban trails. So we excluded them from the Town Lake, Lady Bird Trail. We excluded them from Shoal Creek from 15th and up. From 15th to Lady Bird Lake was dubbed. That was really more that people were using that for transportation, and it was a different type of trail. So I got it so the pilot would not be on 15th and up, because I think people want to be on those trails without having scooters come and running them over. But there were some other trails where they wanted to have the opportunity to try them out to see if they could be part of a mobility solution or not.
And I want to add, thank you, Alison. I think, Councilmember Alter and I, both serving on mobility, are both very focused on getting the right set of rules in place for these devices. But I think it's also important to note some of the positives that we're seeing from these devices being in the community. I think also important to note that the makeup of this room isn't necessarily representative of the makeup of the city. Right? Important to note that. I think anytime we have a community conversation, and that's something we talk about, even like who can get down to City Hall and testify and who can go to town hall meetings, right? So it becomes a challenge that we don't just kind of look around and say what people think just to your left and right. But some of the data that we're seeing and the surveys that we're seeing on the positive side is the number of folks that are opting for scooters instead of cars. Now, the numbers are fuzzy, admittedly, but what we are seeing is 200,000 to 300,000 scooter trips a month. And Lyft, at the very least, did a survey of their riders that said between 30 and 40% of those were saying that they were taking a scooter instead of getting in their car. So, to the extent that any of this is scientific, I won't attest. But there's certainly anecdotal stories that we all have on all sides of the scooter issue. I know, at least for my part, I like to use the scooters and I leave my car at City Hall, so you don't see my car taking up space on the internal city streets. It also means I'm more likely to get on the bus because I'm more comfortable to know I can get to more places when I take that bus. And we're seeing some evidence, again, not necessarily scientific at this point, that the scooters are bunching up at some bus stops. So there are indications that there may be a way to do this where the rules really help us with the safety and this distribution and the accessibility stuff and preserve the positive aspects of these new mobility devices.
So I think it's helpful to talk about the positive aspects, but the data is really fuzzy, as you just admitted. We don't know how many people would have been walking if they were not on scooters. We don't know how many people are not walking because they don't want to be run over by a scooter. We don't really know how many people are getting hurt by these scooters because they're only measuring them if they, called EMS or you went to the emergency room. And there are plenty of people who are getting hurt on these scooters and going to urgent care or something, and we haven't to date had the systems to track the data within our public health system to understand if there's a concurrent public health crisis or not. Right now what we're seeing with the little that they have is that there's not, but the data is kind of fuzzy because we don't have the coding. We have the CDC coming in and working with public health. They're doing a study right now. We don't have the results. We've all heard anecdotes of various accidents and other things, but we are kind of operating in this sort of no man's land where our data is not good and we know we need better data. And so one of the things that we're trying to do as a city is get that data, but to some degree we have to rely on the companies. And so again, it goes back to what is that relationship and how do we cultivate that relationship so we get the benefits, but we address the things that we need to address so that everyone has an opportunity to be mobile in the city and that we're not pushing people off the sidewalks who would otherwise be on the sidewalks because the devices are making it uncomfortable for them to navigate. And there are no answers. This is something that all of these cities are innovating and we're trying to get right. But that search for that data on a lot of different levels is something that we're struggling with and working towards getting.
Do you have a second question? We've just been going back and forth.
You're making my job wonderful here. I do want to ask, do we know if anyone has been killed yet in Austin on a scooter?
Yes, there was somebody killed I think it was a couple of weeks ago on a scooter, but it was a scooter with a vehicle, and we don't at this point know whether it was the scooter's fault or the vehicle, although I think the scooter was going in the wrong direction on the road, so my assumption is that it's...
And it was on I-35 access road, it wasn't just
Oh,
a road.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay.
But there have been accidents, and my son was hit by a scooter getting off a Cap Metro bus on August 31st. He was getting off a bus nowhere near downtown, at like 42nd and Lamar, getting off a Cap Metro bus with the bus door open for a good 8 seconds, with everything captured on film, with a scooter coming and knocking him into the street. The guy stayed for a whole minute. We had everything on tape, but there's no way to hold the guy liable because my son wasn't on a vehicle, and the dockless is not a vehicle, and he wasn't fully incapacitated, and even though he was a minor and the guy stayed for less than a minute, the liability framework we have doesn't work, and these things are really happening all over the city, and we have to get the riders to understand their responsibilities as riders as part of it, and that education is really important, and the health impacts are real. We don't know the full magnitude of those.
One of the things I'm interested to find when the CDC study comes in, and again, to Allison's point, they're measuring EMS response, so it's not necessarily I scraped my knee and that's in the system, but to the extent that the severe injuries are because of conflicts with other people or cars or bikes, and how much of this might just be because the devices themselves are unsafe. There was at least one news story I recall that somebody got injured and it was just them on a scooter on a path, right? And so if the devices themselves are unsafe, that's a much stronger claim to say we can't have these on. At the same time, if we can narrow down why those devices are unsafe, and the companies do continue to iterate their technology. Lyft showed me their next version that's supposed to come out very soon with bigger wheels and additional braking technology and other things on it. But that, I think, is going to be an interesting measure too, because if it's the type of thing that the devices themselves are inherently unsafe, then it makes more sense to say you can't have it.
Right. And you've been raising this a lot, Jimmy, in our meetings, is, are there safety features on these scooters that we need to make sure that the scooters in Austin have, and there's variation. The more companies that we have in Austin doing this, the more variation there are in the types of scooters, the more different kind of equipment people have to be used to using, the more that has to be serviced or is not getting serviced. Those are all issues that we're trying to address. Another one that's been particularly rising to the top right now is the environmental consequences of the scooters with respect to them being dropped in the creeks. And other things. Dallas, I think it was, had an experience of, just mounds and mounds of bicycles that got left there when some company left. We have it set up so they're not able to kind of do that, but if somebody gets mad about a scooter, whether they're the rider or they're not, and they throw it in the creek, or somebody has an accident and ends up in the creek, these are very strong batteries in terms of their environmental consequences. It's not something that we, want to have happen, and so we have to build in the mechanisms to hold folks responsible. People need to know who to call, when something happens.
And don't take that to mean that if you don't like the scooters, you should throw them in the lake.
I was not
Please,
saying that.
please don't do that.
But they're very strong feelings. I mean, part of, I think both, when we saw how this particular talk was framed, my reaction was, I don't actually think Jimmy and I are that far apart at this point in time. I think maybe, back in April or May of last year, we would have been further apart, certainly in August. After my son was hit, we would have been very far apart on that. But I think there's discussions that have to be had about how do we do this right, that recognize the strong affinities that some people have to using the scooters and the strong antipathy that others have for the scooters being in their way, in their place where they want to be able to function, and the fears that they create, and sometimes very founded fears about the health consequences and the safety issues that are arising.
Part of my job as a moderator is to see if you could somehow possibly find common ground.
Doing great.
I guess I did my job. Scratch off half my questions here. I was surprised when I was looking at the number of scooters here and thought, this can't be right. But one article said there were 11,000 scooters in Austin now.
It's more than that.
I think it's more than that.
If anyone's interested, we just had a mobility committee meeting on Thursday, and the backup for that has a whole presentation. It has the data.
There's even an online portal that will allow you to track each individual scooter, which I think we've made public. But that data does exist. I think it was closer to 17,000, just to pull a number out of my head, but it's a lot.
So you track them by name or what? How do you track
Well, if you've ever ridden a scooter, you know that they have individual codes on each device, so they are separately tracked by their own companies, because it would make sense, because you got to charge the person, but they also share that data with the city at varying levels of specificity. But that is part of the process as we work with the companies.
We'll eventually get to audience questions, but I have one that I'm really curious about now. Jimmy mentioned this is not exactly the key demographic for scooter users in Austin, but can I have a show of hands? How many people have actually ridden on a scooter here?
For the cameras, it's 2.
There's two plus Jimmy.
Oh, 3, yeah.
Yeah.
I like
Okay.
They're just too dangerous.
So we all interact with them. Jimmy mentioned the possibility, if these vehicles are inherently unsafe, of getting rid of them, so they can't have them in the city. Is that a real possibility now, given how pervasive they are and how a growing number of young people are depending on them? Is it really possible to ban them?
I think that's why we have to go through this very deliberate process, because we have to eliminate all of the things that folks could say could solve the problem. And once we've eliminated the universe under which we control, and if they're still bad, then it's still bad.
And it's not static, because the technology is evolving, and we may get to a point where all of a sudden there's a glitch and the software's not working and the equipment's not working for that particular batch, and we have to figure it out as we go. I mean, once we figure out these rules, we're still going to have to innovate, and we're still going to have to change them over time. And I think that's part of what we did pass in April, was essentially to say, okay, you got to start somewhere, but we want to empower you to iterate as we need to be able to understand how do we regulate so we get the positives and that we address the negatives. The whole event today, I think, is premised on kind of what is the role of government in a situation like this. And the market is not going to, in this case, take care of the public health and safety aspects on its own. And we have a very important role to provide the framework within which they're operating. Would I have preferred for us to be able to have done our pilot and figured things out before they came in? Yes. That's not the reality that we're dealing with at this point, and so we're working with what we have in order to be able to move forward in a way that benefits the city. There will continually be new pieces of this that surprise us or that need to be addressed. So I live near the School for the Blind, and on a regular basis, there are students at the School for the Blind who are learning how to walk as a visually impaired person for the first time, or with the first time with aid of various equipment and help. And when the scooters got introduced into that area, it wreaked havoc for the school. And you didn't have to be a member of the school to understand how dangerous those scooters were, just being parked the way they were parking near the schools. And so I really emphasize this with the staff, and they've gone and they've worked with the businesses to go out to the School for the Blind and talk to them and understand what's going on, and they've taken various steps, and they're going to be working on kind of what does the parking for the scooters in that area look like, and how are they managing it. They have different elements that are, that they control as businesses, and it varies from company to company, but trying to understand how they can use their technology to address concerns as they arise and as they become more apparent is something that our staff is really trying to do, and we're trying to create a framework that is flexible and that the relationships are deep enough where we can make change when we need to.
And I'll give you a couple of examples of how the technology is evolving and still yet to evolve, but we've identified. One of the proposals is that the speed limit on the scooters themselves might be different based on which segment of the roadway they're on. So if you're on a segment of roadway that has a protected bikeway, like 3rd Street, if you think about 3rd Street as it goes through downtown, then maybe the speed limit's a little higher because it's a safer space. But on 2nd Street, where the road is narrow and it's mostly sidewalk, maybe that speed limit should be lower. The challenge for that is GPS technology doesn't work so great around big, tall towers. So you have to upgrade the GPS location service antennas so that the devices can be more specific about which square foot they're on. That will then dictate the scooters. And this is the type of thing that we can partner with the companies on through a fee schedule to help put in the thing to the thing. Another evolution of the scooters is a display, a screen that's right on the scooter, like a iPad that's kind of built into it, that would tell the user that you can't park it where you're at. Like if you're by the School for the Blind, if you're on the Capitol grounds, or if we identify certain streets where we don't want to see the scooters parked because we've identified scooter parking in other places, which is something the city has just started to roll out, painted boxes that are specifically for the scooters. So that technology evolution is ongoing, and it's the type of thing that as we identify the things, the companies so far have been responsive. Not all companies as responsive as each other. That makes sense the way I laid that out. But that's where I think maybe the franchise idea might come into play, but other regulations that once we get a sense of what those devices need to say and do, then we can mandate that those devices need to do and say those things.
One of the companies is now finding their users if they park their scooter on the trail down at Lady Bird Lake, and that's a really big helpful step. One of the big constraints we have is APD is already constrained enough in terms of its numbers to be able to do its job that it already has, let alone trying to enforce traffic rules on folks who are driving wrong on their scooters. And so we have to create a framework so that there are other mechanisms to get that enforcement and that we have the education, but that APD has the resources it's needed, paid for by the fees from the scooters, to have the personnel to be able to enforce the laws that we do have and that we are able to impose so that we get a safe environment.
So let me ask another question. If trying to find common ground is not going to be a useful focus for this meeting, let's go the other direction. Are there issues that have not been addressed yet where you can actually see there's going to be some disagreement in the city council?
That's a weird question.
Yeah.
Like, tell us in advance where you're going to fight. Like, I feel like we know where the questions are, but until we know the relevant answers, it will be hard to know where we disagree. I think we want all the same questions answered. I think where you at some point, okay, this may be my answer. At some point, so I'm thinking through it, at some point we will be done. At some point we'll be like, you know what, I think we have maxed our ability to prevent terrible people from being terrible. Right? I mean, we have essentially reached that point with cars. You know, the hands-free device regulation is the most recent, but we're kind of at the limit of where regulation changes behavior, and then it just becomes an enforcement question. And just as we're struggling to have enough APD resources to enforce rules on scooters, every neighborhood in my district wishes there were more cops catching speeders, right? So it's not a challenge that's limited to these devices. So I think at some point there'll be a place where enough of the council feels that the regulations are sufficient. That may be the place of disagreement, but it's kind of really hard to predict.
I think that they're different council districts are impacted by the scooters in different ways. So the folks that are downtown and central are experiencing the scooters in a different way. They're hearing from their constituents in a different way. I don't know how many scooters are up in your district that folks, obviously they come downtown and they use them, but they're different. I'm not hearing from many of my constituents that they love the scooters. I'm definitely hearing that, they want to be able to be on the trail and not have a scooter run them down, that when they're working downtown, they want to be able to walk on the street and not feel like they're going to get run over, and they're frustrated with the behavior that they're observing. That's kind of what I'm hearing. School for the Blind, the folks are very concerned kind of about the safety. My own experience with that is informing me. But they're different needs also in terms of what the potential for the mobility improvement could be from those scooters if they were able to operate in different districts. We have a lot of hills in my district. It's not really going to be an efficient use and a safe use for the scooters, given all those hills and other things, in the same way that might be some other part of town where you have a lot of folks who want to take the bus, there's bus access, but they can't get there that last mile. The potential benefits for that mobility and finding ways so that these services are not only downtown in some areas. There's going to be variations in opinion based on what we're hearing, based on the potential for the scooters to solve some of the, mobility challenges. So I think you see, it's almost like it's not so much a difference of opinion as much as a different level of attention or attention to different things based on what we're hearing from folks in our district.
And that's kind of true on every issue.
Yes.
I mean, it's the challenge and the advantage of districts, I think. And then, to your point, Alison, there are not very many of those devices physically in District 6. And just for clarity, District 6 starts at Balcones Woods Drive, I think all the way up at Balcones Woods, all the way up into Williamson County and Lakeline Mall and the Avery Ranch neighborhood, which kind of lives in, and then down 620 to Mansfield Dam. It's a pretty big spread out district. But there are parts of District 6 I wish there were scooters, because we've got the Lakeline station where the red line is, but also a lot of express bus service that is kind of walking distance, but more appropriately bike and scooter distance from some major apartment complexes. And none of us want to have to continue paving parking lots at a park and ride. If we can get more people to these transit centers, then you could imagine a geofenced area where those devices would be useful. They're not there now as much as I wish they would be for some of my residents out there. And then I have other constituents that, in fact, one I spoke to today, I promised him I would tell you all this story because he's like up in my face a little bit. He's a small business owner in my district. I've known him for many years. He's pretty conservative, I think is fair for me to say about him, but has supported me both in the elections that I've been in. He, on the side, drives for Uber and Lyft. So he's a small business that's located in far northwest Austin, but he is downtown driving people on the weekends, and he talks about the challenges he's seen with the scooters, like going down the wrong way of a one-way street, being unsafe users of the roadway. And it's not going to be an issue that any district is exempt from, because nobody just lives their whole life in one district. And I think that's always something to remind folks. When there are issues on roads that are in other districts, we're all concerned about what those things and how those impacts are going to apply to everybody.
Okay, so let's broaden the question a little bit, because you did tie us back to what's the right amount of regulation as a broader question. I'm going to ask you both in a moment to talk about the bag ban and Uber and Lyft. And I'm going to approach this, they're two separate questions, but they're related. And I want to...
I'm just going to interrupt very briefly. I was just told there's a 4-door Nissan Sentra. It's silver that's parked in a federal parking spot, and they are about to tow it. So that's yours.
You'll need to use a scooter to get it.
Yeah, so it's parked on the other side, or I believe it's in one of the federal spots. So if it's not ours, then I am very sorry. I just wanted to make sure that's
Thank you. Okay. So let's start with a very broad question. What do you think we learned from the bag ban attempt?
we learned that our city council actually knows something about trying to achieve the goals that our city demands, and that our state judiciary and our state legislature don't want to allow us to do the things that our constituents want us to do. We were saving tons of plastic from our landfill. We were, keeping our creeks cleaner because these bags were not there. People learned to change their behavior. It was not, I don't think, once it got started, once it moved forward, I don't think it was a major imposition on people. I was not hearing from businesses that, that they couldn't afford to do this, and that this was a major burden, but the judiciary ruled for another city that the bag ban was not allowed because we're not supposed to regulate waste, which I would think would be a municipal role. And so now we're back to where we were, and some companies, we're trying to encourage companies to stick with the ban and keep those plastic bags out of our landfills voluntarily, and for people to bring their bags. But it's unfortunate because we will, I don't think we have measures yet of what the uptick is going to be, but I do occasionally come across retailers that are using the bags, and I would just encourage everyone to tell them, hey, I'm your customer, and I really don't want you to do that unless something's going to really leak and we really feel like we really need the plastic. We'd rather you didn't do that, and we're watching. But right now we have really only the voluntary mechanisms, but you as consumers do have some control in encouraging retailers to follow the right path.
The plastic bag ban is a fascinating example because, and I spoke to some Austin Resource Recovery city staff, which is the waste management folks. From their understanding, it's the first time a regulation was in place for a number of years and then undone. So there's an opportunity now to measure behavior change as it relates to regulation. How many people post the judicial decision start using the bags again or don't start using the bags again? Was it a successful, so there's a kind of an academic element to this. The plastic bag ban was a topic of conversation in the campaign I was in 2014. That was a crazy campaign, if you all recall, like 1 million candidates and every district at the same time. But the candidates, at least in District 6, that made the plastic bag ban a centerpiece of their campaigns did not make it to the runoff. There are going to be folks that kind of feel that that's their right. Their right is to have a plastic bag. My boyfriend actually works at H-E-B. He's a checkout manager, and he told me stories of some customer responses he was getting right after the judicial decision, and a handful of customers coming in kind of with that perspective. Like, I demand you give me a plastic bag. Not understanding what the ruling was. Does not force the use of plastic bags, but that has stopped. And I know, at least in my own behavior, I still refuse to use plastic bags. I still use reusable bags. I refuse plastic bags when I've only got 2 or 3 things and I can carry it out. And I see a lot of other people doing it, but I think Alison has really hit the nail on the head. It has now shifted to consumer demand on the businesses. And I guarantee you, like with anything, businesses will hear more from the negative than from the positive. So letting your H-E-B management, when you see them in your store, thanking them for not bringing back the thin plastic bags, and any place you see that is still sticking with paper or the tougher reusable style, make sure to let them know that you appreciate it. Because I guarantee you the people who don't appreciate it are speaking up.
Yeah, I just know personally, I agree. It has changed the behavior of my wife and I, and I'm glad at least the H-E-Bs I know of within city limits have not changed their policy. They are still not using the single-use plastic bags. Let's go on to the other topic. What have we learned from the Uber Lyft story?
Be very careful on this.
I don't know, Alison, what have you learned? Is it my turn to go first? It's my turn to go first. So watching that externally, it was definitely a topic of conversation as I was knocking on doors during my campaign, and I don't know if you had a similar experience during yours. But I think one of the lessons is that we do live in a challenging political environment at the state level, like I mentioned earlier. And I acknowledge that the scooters are not a one-to-one relationship. But if we're just talking about the Uber and Lyft situation specifically, that in the environment, from a pragmatic perspective, in the environment that we're given, there are benefits to taking a slow and methodical approach with the business community so that we can end up in a better place than we would have otherwise. I find it frustrating that we have companies that are profiting off the public right-of-way and not contributing to the public right-of-way. I think that's the biggest disappointment for me in that whole saga, is that we weren't in a place where we could capture the impact of a business conducting their commerce on the property that you all paid for through your taxes. And that's, I think, the most frustrating thing for me. I will say anecdotally, I was working downtown at the time, and I felt the difference in the downtown traffic when we had, in that period where it was banned, there was a lot less traffic circulating through downtown. Again, just anecdotal, but I did feel that. And that's where, for me, the scooter opportunity sounds more interesting, because removing short trips can really provide a benefit to the throughput on the roads that we have. And I think, the whole council, as we've spoken in some very recent council meetings, we cannot pave our way out of a traffic congestion problem. We have to be multimodal, and we have to think about how to get people to places and not just, 5-ton vehicles.
So the Uber Lyft stuff wasn't really an issue on my campaign in 2016, and I just really appreciate Ride Austin and their efforts to create a homegrown rideshare opportunity. I too felt the difference in terms of the numbers of cars and the traffic and whatnot. Just because we haven't been allowed to regulate them doesn't mean that there aren't still potentially challenges that should have been regulated or that we would like to regulate. We still do hear of incidents that are happening with these drivers, and we have no way of tracking them and making sure. I'm not sure, as a parent of a teen, that I want to send my kids in an Uber, because of them not having the fingerprinting, not knowing whether that's a safe mode, and I think it's something that we continue to ask ourselves. The broader question of who should regulate and how should this work, and there are different pieces and there's different levels of onerousness with respect to the regulations, and I just still fail to see that fingerprinting drivers was such an onerous thing that it couldn't be done in our community. There are lots of other cities that have taken different tactics and either been successful or failed, but which we were prevented from being able to do as a city. And I think that the broader state environment in which we're operating, where our ability to exercise municipal control is taken out of our hands, is unfortunate. We see this with short-term rentals as well. There are other cities that are able to do different things that we might like to be able to do, but given our environment, we probably can't do. And so we get suboptimal outcomes for the community, while these companies make a lot of money off of the community and have impacts on some of our key issues of mobility and affordability. And we may never know what the real impacts are, but we need to continue to ask the questions and try to understand that. The challenge is, if you ask one of those questions and you get an answer and you really know that it's a problem, there's not a lot we can do about it because the tools have been taken away from us by the state.
And I just want to thank you all, for those of you that participate actively in the elections process and go out and volunteer and knock on doors and make donations to campaigns. We have a few new state representatives representing the city of Austin. I'm going to be as nonpartisan as I can. But I think it's accurate to say that some of them that I share with District 6 are much more in the belief that Austinites keep re-electing these council members because we agree with the things the council is doing. That's democracy, and that the state shouldn't pretend that they're a city council. The state needs to solve the things that are state things, like school finance. And I know, Councilmember Elser, you worked really hard on the school finance question. So thank you all, because I know many of you, I recognize and I know a lot of you that work very hard with campaigns and in the elections. And we were successful here locally. We're going to have to continue to be successful in 2020 and especially 22. But getting through 2020 pre-redistricting, I think, is going to dictate the future of our region. So keep it up.
Thank you. I'm going to give Alison a chance to make any final statements and comments she wants. Then we're going to move into audience questions. I'm going to ask Joanne to help with that process. But first, Alison.
I too want to thank you for being engaged and involved. I see many of you who were involved in my campaign who have been involved in helping us have important conversations as a city on a number of issues. I'm on a crusade right now to help us address what I think is the key issue that we could address in the next 6 months to help affordability and equity in our city, which is school finance reform at the state level. So I'm not going to miss this opportunity to engage you guys in that crusade. So I and some other parents and students of AISD started a campaign. It's called Just Fund It TX. And we are trying to change the debate over school finance so that we're not just pitted one against the other. We're not fighting over the scraps between rich and poor, but really asking our legislators to do the right thing and adequately fund public education. We're asking 3 things. We're asking, first of all, for them to increase the amount of funding so that we can meet the goals that we have for our kids and attract and retain our teachers. We're asking the state to pay its fair share, up to more than 50% of the share of public education, and we're asking the state to spend money that's raised for education on education. Here in Austin, just looking at AISD, we are sending $673 million to fund education elsewhere in the state. Now, every child in our state deserves a good education, but the way that the system is set up right now is disproportionately affecting Austin. So take that $673 million. We are only raising about $500 million in property taxes in the city of Austin for your police, your fire, parks, etc. You can't even pay for all of those things with our property taxes. It's less than how much we're sending out in recapture. And AISD is facing a deficit of 55 million plus looking forward, while we're sending $673 million elsewhere in the state, while we have children in our city who are not getting the funding they need. So I would like to invite you to take a look at justfundittx.org. The students put together a petition. We're trying to get that around. We have all sorts of resources if you want to host a meeting like this, you want to host a house party, you want to call your friend in another part of Texas to do that. I have some of these in the back. We have these love letters that we're asking people to say what you love about your public school or why you should have school finance reform. We're going to deliver these to the legislators. Our delegation here in Austin is very much behind school finance reform, so you can send yours to Representative Bonin, you can send it to Lieutenant Governor, the Governor, you can also send it, of course, to the representatives. But I really need you to call all your friends all over the state and tell them to get on board. The petition is a super easy way, but anything that they can do to reach out to their legislators and say we need real school finance reform. None of this smoke and mirrors. They're talking about $7 billion, they're talking about $9 billion. We are 43rd in the country for spending for pupils. I don't know any Texan who's satisfied with being 43rd on anything. We would have to spend $22 billion per year just to get up to be 25 per student, and that's West Virginia. And Texas is over 10% of the public school students in the country. And so if we underfund our schools, we are handicapping our entire country. So please get involved. There's some flyers back there. There's some of these love letters. We need volunteers. We need folks to go out and really spread the word, particularly outside of Austin, because it's those legislators outside of Austin who need to understand that this is a problem that every district is facing. So thank you for letting me make that plug. Appreciate it.
So let me begin the process of asking questions by telling people that we're asking you to keep your comments minimally, but at the same time, be sure that you put your question in some context, which is fine. But if it goes on and on and on too long, I'll do a time and say, what's your question? Yeah, please.
I'm very interested in the scooter issue, and what I was hearing was the one person riding one scooter. And I didn't know if you're aware or are looking at or even possibly regulated. There are a number of very entrepreneurial young people that have scooter tours downtown. I live downtown, and I'll walk by a corner and they'll have like 12 people standing around, and they're saying, okay, this is how you get on the scooter, this is how you go. And then they take them on these just flying downtown, 12 brand new scooter riders all at once, or 15 or however many. And it occurred to me, I don't know if the city council is aware of that, or if these people are regulated, are they allowed to do that? And I don't know if that's something that you're looking at, kind of spin-off businesses built on the scooter model. Because what I was just hearing, so far has been one person, one scooter. Where did you leave it? Where are you riding it? So is that on the radar? Is that something?
It's not something that we've discussed as a council. It sounds very similar to the Segway tours or other types of one person per device, but in a group moving in a body. So it wouldn't be the first example of that occurring downtown, but I'm not specifically aware of a regulation or oversight. That doesn't mean it's not happening, because there are already other businesses that do that. Like the Segway tours, I think, is the most visible one that I've seen.
Joanne?
First, Councilmember Alter, I'm sorry your child got hit by someone who was inconsiderate on a scooter. It happens. They block the curb cuts, they block the sidewalks. We've done a good thing downtown by having the dedicated, bike lane. You may want to talk to John Eastman with the city, because he actually did a once-in-a-lifetime trip overseas. And what he saw opened his eyes. He saw light vehicle, not just bike lanes, but light vehicle, safe lanes all over different countries. And also, for Uber and Lyft, I'm glad you weren't on the council then, but I was here and I spoke to make them more accessible. And that was the only way I took an Uber today to get to this meeting on time. Now, Adaptive Texas has come before you at the Mobility Committee when we can. Unfortunately, on Thursdays, we now go to, during the session, we go to that lovely building on 1100 Congress Avenue and spend hours there. That's why you haven't seen us lately. But we would love to talk to you about these issues.
Do you have a question?
And also affordable housing. Affordable housing is a major issue, and with that, you as council people can do many good things for the disability community. And I'm glad your constituents at the School for the Blind have alerted you to the dangers.
Thank you.
So I just want to say the issues that you're bringing up are really important in terms of the accessibility, and part of the reason that we're trying really have to focus on the behavioral change and getting the scooters to be parked. So there's the dangers of when they're in motion, and there's the dangers of when they're in parked, and you do see better behavior now than we did. It's not perfect, but when they first came out, they'd be right in the ramps. They would be blocking all sorts of things. They would be they're thrown all over the place. To the degree that they are concentrated downtown, I think they're having to pay more attention to having them lined up in ways that have less of an impact on accessibility. They're not perfect, but we have moved in the right direction, I think, than where we started. And I know that it's very important to our staff to have the community that's most impacted part of those conversations to understand stuff, and that's why I was very pleased with them going out to the School of the Blind and bringing the companies and having those conversations. And I would encourage your group to reach out directly to the companies themselves if you haven't, and have those conversations.
Yeah, I'm also focused on the enforcement side and making sure that there are folks that aren't just tracking the moving violations, but, you know, the Downtown Austin Alliance has folks walking around picking up trash. Are they just walking by a scooter if it's blocking the sidewalk? And if they were to move it, is that charged back to the company? You know, thinking through those issues. And thank you, Ignatowski, for lobbying, for going down and working at the ledge, because that is a big issue for us as a community. And I guarantee your lack of presence at the City Hall doesn't mean we have forgotten about you.
You won't forget about us, and you will not forget about me.
Thank you.
Not a chance.
Because I know how to find you both.
So, Pat, you got one question. We're going to go around the room this way. And I'll get you.
I don't understand the rules, and are there rules, and can it be controlled about where they go and the direction they go on sidewalks? Specifically, I was walking about a month ago from Whole Foods North on Lamar, and they were coming directly down a narrow sidewalk. Hill had to hit me and push me into the wall not to be hit head-on by people on scooters. Is there anything about directionality in the rules, or should there be?
Near-death experience. Go on.
We haven't seen the new rules for the Safe Rider ordinance, so I don't know if they've, included directionality in that. So we don't have the, they've been working on this, and I think that's been one of the issues that's been brought up, but whether it's in the draft or not, I don't know. Again, we can have all the rules we want, but if we have no mechanism to enforce them, it doesn't matter. And so we have to couple any rules that we create with enforcement. We also, the rules, because the dock list is not in the state code, like it can only go up to a certain type of crime if there's a issue. And that may be good. We may not want these, we may not want them to be overly criminalized, but there are limits that we're working with, and I just don't know the answer of whether it's in the draft of the ordinance.
And I would expect that, much like bicycles are supposed to travel in the same direction as the vehicles, I would expect it to be similar. But as Councilmember Walters said, this is an enforcement question and the weird space of law that we're trying to cobble together.
And it's different on the sidewalk than on the road, so we can enforce, so it's definitely illegal on the road, I think, but not, I don't know the answer for the sidewalk.
Okay, yes. I'll be as brief as I can. Today, I don't know if you've seen this, today's Wall Street Journal picked Austin as the hottest city in America.
Temperature-wise?
Yeah. Business-wise. So, congratulations. The question really is kind of what makes that happen. Part of it's the state of Texas, part of it's Austin, what we're doing. And I hope that the council and others in this country are in Austin and asking your opinion on this. I studied economics in college, so I'm kind of there is government need and there's people doing what they should be doing. I personally think the scooter thing is going to take care of itself. I don't. Now, I don't mean today. I mean over time. It's kind of like skateboards in my generation. When people were getting killed on them, we quit using them. We even figured it out ourselves. But the question would be is, I view Austin as a kind of a leaning left, kind of in the middle though, leaning left as a total city. And I don't think the further left you do get, i.e. when you look in this thing, all of the cities that are failing are heavily New York City, Buffalo, all of New York, all of Ohio, all of Michigan. So the question is, how do you see Austin going based on what we've heard? Left, right, far left, right?
That's not part of
No,
this.
Y'all,
No, I
look, we're gonna be
sorry,
cordial, right? We're gonna be cordial,
No, I
we're
thought
gonna be
it was
nice.
open
You
question.
have the floor.
Y'all,
Open?
For real.
Open question.
Open question.
for real. I think Austin is much farther left than people give it credit for. If we're going to discuss things in a kind of like two-option, I think it's much more
No, no,
complicated
no.
than that, right?
No.
And if anything, I think we're experiencing politics as a circle, not a spectrum. And you find some really weird allies at times. You know, the challenge for us is when we analyze other cities is it's not entirely clear that a partisan definition fully explains what makes cities different from each other. Pretty much every city is left. I mean, pretty much every city is left in terms of a partisanship story. But different cities approach municipal issues dramatically differently. And when you talk about the cost of housing and growth, you know, the policies in San Francisco are much more restrictive than they are here, even as restrictive as they are. And it's just a much more complicated question than to just tie it to partisanship. I think that's where our legislature gets into trouble, is when they make things about partisanship and don't understand that municipal issues just don't work that way. And it's why they're nonpartisan elections. I think it works better.
That really was part of my question. It wasn't really the question. Is where do we
I would,
Please,
Allison gets these.
let me answer
civil
just one.
conversations.
Let me just say a couple things here. Part of what makes Austin great is the fact that you guys are spending your Saturday afternoon having a conversation here. We have so much social capital in Austin that you can find a club to go play chicken chip bingo in Austin. I mean, like, there are so many things that we have as an option here in Austin. No matter your interest, you can go and have conversations, people engage, and that means that we as a city government have the benefit of more than just our 11 folks that are on the dais, their ideas. We as a city have a commitment to broader engagement for folks who have less time and less access. We are trying to get those voices, and what happens when you get more of those voices is you better understand what the challenges are and you can come up with solutions. So that's one piece that's not framed in there with Austin. The other part of it is that we are not this top city by accident, and we are not this top city because we let, you know, businesses in the market do everything. We have values as a city, and we put priorities on things that make our city a place where people want to live, whether it's our parks, our environment, our schools, whatever it is. We have done things as a community and as a municipal government to make investments that make people want to be here, totally apart from what the market is doing. And we need to not lose sight of that as we move forward, is that, you know, it matters what kind of city we live in for our growth. It's not just about the market.
And thanks for your recognition that we have the social capital. That's a concept I think we need to pay more attention to.
So,
Yes, I was wondering, is Austin way out in front on this, or are there other cities that we can learn from? How much are we pioneers on the scooter issue? Can we rely on somebody that has gone before us, or are we cursed with inventing the wheel here in Austin?
We're all of these cities were kind of thrown into this mess at once, but Austin is leading on a way out that's hopefully going to benefit the city, because we were preparing to do it, and we had the people in place who knew how to do it. Even if we didn't have our plan fully in place, but we were anticipating the challenge and were ready
can we learn from anybody else?
There are things that we're learning, like the boxes that they're painting are things that they're learning, and they're part of what they're doing is they're learning from others. But I think that because Austin is such an attractive market, they're able to have conversations with the companies and build the relationships in ways that some of the other cities have not succeeded in doing, and our staff have recognized the need.
And I would add, kind of in a general sense, Austin is frequently leading on issues of this nature. As an anecdote, I went to a conference a couple of years ago. It was a bunch of cities that were at the conference, and I was a new council member, and I wanted to see what was going on. And there would be these panel discussions, and it would say things like, sustainability for your city. I said, well, that sounds very interesting. I'm very interested in sustainability. And I went into the seminar, and they said, here's what you do. You create an office of sustainability. It's like, we did that like 10 years ago. And every seminar I went into, they were saying basically, go do the stuff Austin's doing. So in many ways, we are out in front. And that's a testament to you all and our predecessors and what the city has been and what we're going to be.
So if all the questions are on this side. I thought I would go to this side of the change. Yeah, go ahead.
Two things. And I think that we had Uber where Uber and the taxi issue, and it took us a long time to resolve that we just needed common regs for those. And then we have scooters that came along and they were permitted, so council wouldn't have to do it. And I'm getting a sense there are a lot of folks that don't feel like we were prepared with even basic regs. So what's the next thing that's coming along that we won't be ready for, that you know that we can provide some basic regs for?
Yes.
And then the second question is a smaller one, but it really alarmed me to read in the paper that city wasn't even requiring the scooters to be inspected, which we would do with cars, we would do with taxis, Uber, etc. And you had you have one of the companies now announcing they're having issues with sudden breakages, sudden braking, and people going over the vehicles and having accidents. Do the regs, potential regs, are you hearing anything that is requiring documentation of inspections?
Well, to your first question, I think autonomous vehicles is the next thing, and there's a lot of work being done to be prepared for that. Austin's been part of a couple of different pilot programs from different companies, so we are a little farther out in front on that, but it's also such a new technology that it's not going to drop in overnight like the scooters really felt like, and in some ways realistically did drop in overnight. We're also taking a long, hard look at autonomous technology on the public transit side, which is kind of a big question we'll be deliberating through the Project Connect process and what we see on that future. As far as the inspections, I'm not familiar with the rules around the inspections beyond the requirement that the devices be operable.
I feel like they either have some rule about inspections or it's going to be in there, but again, we haven't. Anne, I think you came in after we talked at length about some of the safety issues, and I think that that would be in the next steps, but we haven't got we don't have the draft of them. We've only been given some outlines of that, so I can't tell.
What is the actual definition of a scooter? I mean, normally, up until this time, it's always been a toy. You know.
Well, one of the things we're doing is that we're changing the definition in the ordinance so it can cover more than just a scooter. So if something else arises that has a similar nature, then we will be able to regulate it without having limited ourselves to scooters. So I do know that one piece of it is a broader definition of that vehicle than just a scooter, but I don't know what the narrow definition is.
Just curious, is there any discussion in City Council about what Austin does when Texas legalizes marijuana?
Did you say when? Did you say when Texas legalized marijuana?
The fastest growing free periodical, or is the periodicals about marijuana?
Look, the only thing I'm going to say about it is, in states that have legalized marijuana, they still have people in jail for marijuana crime. That would be the first thing I'd want to address.
I'm just wondering if you have any idea what percentage of Austinites would like to ban scooters, and who is representing that position on the council?
So I am probably the one who is most skeptical of the scooters. Banning them altogether without the safety issues being very clear and evident is not going to be politically feasible, at this point.
But don't you think at least 40% of Austinites would like to ban them?
I think that's probably true. I mean, people love them or they hate them, and there are definitely downsides of them. We're trying to figure out whether there are the benefits to mobility that are claimed, and that goes back to the data issues that we talked about before. Our initial data, now that they finally have some data, is suggesting that there are some mobility things that are addressed with the scooters, and the health issues are real, but not necessarily what anecdotally we think. And so, we don't get to just make the policy because we feel like it. We also have to look at the data and the reality on the ground and whether they're serving any purpose. Without doubt, we have to educate and we have to regulate better than where we are now, and we have already done that. I think there's quite a bit of movement from where we started this process, but it is not perfect.
So there's somebody in the maroon that's been walking back and forth in hopes that I...
Thank you.
Please.
Two things. One,
we have lots of time. So.
One, I just want to say Austin is not that special. A lot of places people are socially and civically engaged. I'm very, very tired of hearing how special our town is. Secondly, and this is a completely different moving on from scooters. Maybe the failure of Codenex has nothing to do, but something about land development was in the title. And I had to quit watching after Codenex failed. But my question is, what's going on with the rewrite of the development land? Is anything going on? I had to quit watching. I couldn't stand it. But is anything going on, or did y'all just like move on and say, never mind? What else?
Do you want me to go?
We are not saying never mind, because we still have a problem, right? We are still dissatisfied with the nature and the scale in which the city is growing. How we solve that problem will not necessarily get less controversial, but that is still something that is going to be addressed. And the mayor and myself and others have said in public that we intend to do it as quickly as possible. And my hope is to see this process move forward in the next 12 months.
In the next
12 months.
12 months.
Like to completion in the next 12 months.
Alison, you want to say anything?
Codenex was a mess. I'm glad we ended it. If we hope to move forward in a more productive manner, we are going to have to approach things differently. We are going to have data that is actually real. We're going to have to understand what different things that we're proposing actually mean on the ground, and we are going to have to have the information that we need as a council to make decisions shared with us.
We sure spent a lot of money on it.
We spent a lot of money. I didn't vote for the additional money to be spent on it, as the process we knew was broken for a long time beforehand. We have tasked as a council the city manager with coming up with the process, and my hope is that he understands where we are as a community and where those conversations need to be. I don't know whether we can get it done within the 12 months that Mr. Flannigan is suggesting, because I don't know what process he's laying out and how we're going to get there. I think there are elements of the land development code where rewrite where there is a fair amount of agreement. I think there are places where we definitely need to make changes, but the wholesale rewrite and remapping all coming at once based on data that at times was not accurate was problematic, to say the least.
I've seen the drone pictures of Lady Bird Lake with like dozens of scooters down by the bridge. And it seems to me it would be very simple to require the scooter people to have those battery and toxic things waterproofed, because we have all kind of waterproof stuff that goes underwater all the time. And to me that should be a minimal thing, because we can't let those things damage our ecosystems and kill our fish and what have you. So it seems like that should be a very simple thing to seal those units so that they're waterproof.
One of your many emails to me, if you get to send me I welcome your emails. I don't mean that the way that came out. I just know that you actually will do it.
As Councilmember Alter said, I often talk about what the physical regulations on the devices look like, because I think that's going to be a really important and productive area. I do know that the next iteration of technology from at least one company will be doing it.
Good.
So what my hope is that we then require and get them to remove devices that don't comply.
Good.
So that issue can at least be, that part of it can be addressed.
Thank you.
Francis, we'll go to Francis.
Yeah. I would like for you to talk about the rules and regulations of bicycles, because I'm confused. I drive on roads many times that have huge, double bicycles, and I don't know when the person is riding on the line that's right behind me, how to get over 3 feet and things like that. And also, are the people who ride bicycles ever looked at, or do they know that they run red lights? Do they know that they, how do you regulate the bicyclists?
I will say in college, so this is a number of years ago, I once got a ticket for running a stop sign on a bicycle.
We do that thing around.
So they are regulated and have to obey the rules of the road. But just like people in cars that sometimes run stop signs and red lights, unless there's somebody there to write the ticket, right? That it's enforcement, just like with anything. There's a lot more experience with bicycles than there are with the motorized scooters, but the rules are in place. It's a question of enforcement. I think what we're experiencing in part, is kind of hit me this morning as I was thinking about it, what hit me in part about what we're experiencing with this rapid adoption of these little personal mobility devices is what other cities in the world got acclimated to on the bicycles, because there's much more bicycle adoption, right, in international cities. And when you go to those international cities, you see much more protected areas for those devices. It's just not how our city has evolved, and frankly most American cities have not evolved that way. And that's what we have to be thinking about. It's got to be about the protected infrastructure.
That would be great.
It's not going to solve the running of the red lights,
No.
but it doesn't solve the cars running the red lights either.
No,
So
but
it's the enforcement question.
Yeah, the other thing that I've run into is at the Shoal Creek in Northland, going south on Shoal Creek. Twice I have run into a group of about 15 to 20 bicyclists that were together at 8:30 in the morning, not allowing traffic going to work to turn to the right, and it took about 3 red lights for them to get across before it opened it up to the car traffic.
All I would add to that is imagine how much more difficult that would be if each one of them was in a car.
Well, they could go faster across the street if they were in the car.
I don't know about that.
So young man in the back with the green shirt, so that's your hand up for a while, and then we'll go to you.
So the context I look at the scooters through is like how does it compare to other modes of transit? So like especially cars, we're acclimated to all the bad things cars do. Like they killed 74 people on our roads last year. That's one every 5 days. 31 pedestrians. That's one every 2 weeks. So that's kind of the framework I look through it. Also, cars only pay about half the cost for the public user fees. Only pay about half the cost of roads, and parking spaces, like most of them are free in Austin. You could park one scooter in a space. You could put probably several dozen scooters in a space for one car. So are you looking at this in the context of like, with other modes of transit, especially maybe like, scooters are like bikes in terms of how fast you can go, the safety aspects. What are you seeing in terms of the context compared to other modes of transit?
I mean, we talk about that. We've talked about it at every committee meeting that we've been in. As Alison said, we're both on the city's mobility committee. We've talked about it at every single one. I think it's a challenging area because there are so many differences between the devices. It's a valid point. It is not the only point. And just from, again, I think trying to be pragmatic about the area that we're in. If we were to just say, well, if your device reaches a certain death threshold, then it's got to be banned. Well, we're not going to do that because we ban all your cars. That's a stupid example, right? Because that's not what we're talking about. So the parallel efforts that we have as a city, the Vision Zero efforts, infrastructure improvements, trying to design streets that are safer for all modes, that includes pedestrians and bikes and cars. And one of the challenges that I see a lot in District 6, these kind of old school suburban developments where the streets are excessively wide because it was like an amenity. Well, it feels like you can drive 60 down that street, and so people do. And so the scale and size of the infrastructure becomes a really important factor.
Yeah.
You talked about the need to restrict the speeds of scooters on some areas, some streets, and maybe restricting them down to 0 around the school for the visually impaired. But this requires higher resolution GPS. Are the companies contributing to improving the signaling for GPS?
We're in talks right now. So, no, but we all agree that we want to find a way to do it.
And I think that companies want to do it as well because their ability to serve their customers is impacted if we don't have access to the GPS and if we don't have the infrastructure for that.
Yeah, there's a real benefit to the user behavior, I think, if just thinking about the difference between 3rd Street and 2nd Street, where you've got a pretty unsafe area on 2nd and a designed to be safe area on 3rd. If the devices were going faster on 3rd Street than on 2nd Street, the users would want to be on 3rd Street, and I think there's elements of user behavior that can be dictated with that too.
Okay, I'm going to talk about the scooters for a minute, and I'll try to make this brief. I'm going to give you an example of something that happened to me, and then I'll go from there. I was on Guadalupe in the UT area, not on UT, because right now I understand UT is managing what's going on there with the scooters. I was stopped at a red light. There was a blind person walking across the street with his stick, I don't know what level, and sitting on the curb, right as you walked up, like you walk up the area you walk up to, was a scooter. I almost got out of my car to go help him, but luckily he was able to maneuver it. So from my standpoint, I know the pros and cons, and there are definitely pros and cons. From the safety issue, I see 2 levels. The first is for those excessively challenged individuals. And the second is, where's the right-of-way between walkers and scooters? Have y'all looked at those 2, like from a separate angle?
We're certainly, the first one on the accessibility issues, we're very much focused on that. ADAPT, the gentleman was here earlier talking about that, has been very vocal in talking about stuff. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to look and see, particularly early on, that these scooters were right in the handicapped ramps and other things. I think the right-of-way, it's the right-of-way, who makes precedence between the scooter and the pedestrian is a really important question, and part of what we have to do is change our ordinances so when the scooter hits the pedestrian, there's some liability there that can happen. And right now, unless that person is decapacitated, gets hit, there's not, because then you can go through other mechanisms. We don't have the legal tools that we need for there to be some liability, and just the existence of that liability can create some more breathing room, because people will know that they're going to be held more accountable, whereas right now it's ambiguous. But we've had to work through a bunch of legal issues to understand what it is that has to be changed and how you do that within the code that we have at the state level for the transportation code when you're dealing with a novel technology that doesn't fit the traditional.
Well, because part of it too is, if you're going to drive a car, you've got to take a test, both a driving test and a written test. But then they give me scooters, and when I'm downtown driving, I'm always aware because, you know, when I say it, 30% just as fun, don't know how to do it.
And that education piece is really important, and I know that they've, they've tried to step up some of the enforcement and talking to students around UT about you have to follow the rules of the road, and whether or not they find them on that initial warning. The fact that they're doing that is making some folks pay more attention to the fact that they have to do rules of the road. But all of that takes resources, and right now the fee structure is not giving us the resources, to do that. So we'll be changing that fee structure and being able to do more of those things, and the companies hopefully will want that to be part of what happens.
And I would just add to that it's my understanding, at least from my own experience, it's been true that this in order to use the app, you have to show your driver's license. So knowledge of the rules of the road, different from operating the device, granted, right? But there is a knowledge of the rules of the road essentially built into having to scan your driver's license to get access to the app.
Let's wrap this up soon so people have one-on-one discussions up here.
Say that again?
Let's wrap this up
This
soon.
woman has
Yeah,
been waiting
well, there
a
are
long
3
time.
people who've had their hand up for, 4 that have had their hand up for a very long time. So if we could all be patient and make those questions as short as possible, we'll go 1, 2, 3, 4.
I just have
I'm
Mary,
sorry,
Mary first.
I tend to think of mobility in a hierarchy, with pedestrians, bikes, cars, like that. And I really see horrible things on the road that scare me about riding a bike. And I was wondering, with the limits of regulation that you talked about a little bit, do y'all have anything going on, or do you have plans for anything to appeal to behavior change of individuals, like either, capitalizing on their brotherly love or their narcissism about living in a really cool city, and how it's really cool to yield the right of way to people on the lower end of the hierarchy? I was wondering if you had any plans to do that.
Well, there are plans to have like slowed down areas, so there are certain parts of town that will get like these big circles that'll be like, dismount area or slow down area. So on Congress, for instance, there are a lot of pedestrians. Where exactly those are going to go in, I don't know. Some cities have done like flyers on the dock list to provide information about how to ride safely. One of the challenges we have is that we have a lot of tourists that come in and use these scooters as well. It's not just the locals that are using them, and how do you educate them? And some of that has to come with, what are the companies doing in order for you to be able to use their scooter in the first place. But I think we're aware of the need for education and different ways to do
It's a
that.
culture change.
Yes.
It's like smoking.
I would add to that, I think it's the same challenge we have about people using their cell phones in their cars.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or anywhere. Yeah.
Did you have a question?
I do too. I want to make a statement. Okay.
Oh, we don't take statements, we have questions.
No. Okay, I almost got killed the other day. I have mobility issues that are not apparently obvious. My question is, why the hell are these stupid things allowed to be on the sidewalk? Are bicycles allowed to be on the sidewalk?
Yes.
They are?
Yep.
Okay.
But that is one of the questions that we're looking at, and we don't know what they're coming back with in the ordinance yet about the rules on the sidewalks. But that is one of the questions that has been
I will
raised.
not go downtown anymore.
Okay,
Period.
thank you.
Yeah.
I'm delighted to hear that Austin works with the businesses. I think that's wonderful. But part of what this is about is regulation, and that we're not allowed to regulate ourselves. I know Denton had that issue as well. Is there anything being done? Are towns, cities in Texas trying to do anything to get back our rights to regulate ourselves, or is that going to just be not even something we
I'll just say briefly, the legislature is currently debating another bill that would preempt local ordinances. Paid sick leave is kind of leading the charge on that from their perspective, but there's a lot of other stuff in it. One of the latest actions that was taken would preempt all of our non-discrimination ordinances for cities across the state of Texas. So we are on the wrong side of that pendulum swing right now. At the same time, cities and the business community are coordinating. And I think what we learned from the bathroom bill debacle from 2 years ago is that the business community knows that these bills are bad for the state of Texas. And there is a lot of organizing around how to ensure that we're speaking with one voice to our elected officials, but stay involved in elections, because it all comes down to what happens in 2020 in redistricting.
Where's the TML on this? Texas Municipal League.
They're involved, and they're at the table.
Good.
One last question.
Yes, on the regulation issue involving scooters as a safety issue, it seems to me that the businesses are motivated to have safe scooters, whether in and of themselves or that they're operated properly, because there is civil liability involved. I mean, certainly if the scooter doesn't work properly, you can sue the scooter manufacturer, and anybody that injures anybody else, including like your son, that's a civil liability against the person who ran into them. If you got the person's name and address, you can sue that person.
carried off before they can.
Hold on. But in theory, that's not, there's civil liability. It's not like it's totally like the Wild West or something. That there wouldn't be any kind of civil liability. So it would seem like businesses would want to make safety a priority because they're going to get sued. Their insurance rates would go up, their legal costs would go up, etc. And it seems like the city's assuming that businesses want to like run roughshod over the public, and they really have motivation to have safety privately.
No, Alison, you looked at the liability thing a lot.
Yeah, the liability issue, yes, there's the civil stuff, but, you know, I don't know who hit my son since he ran off a minute later. I have a picture of him. The scooter company knows exactly who the person was because they have the data, but I need a warrant to find out who it is. And if there's no criminal liability, I don't have a right to get that information from the company unless we have some arrangement for the company to provide us for that. And so it's a very complicated, set of issues, and you know, making it only on the civil side means that it won't be litigated unless it's a situation where you also have the criminal, where somebody's really very seriously incapacitated. I agree with you that I think that the companies want these devices to be safe and have an incentive to do that. But as you know, car companies have the same incentive, and we've had to institute things over time to make them even safer against the wishes of the car companies. And it may be that we have to do the same with respect to the scooters. I don't know exactly which thing we might need to do, but I don't want to pretend like we don't have a role as a government to try to do that. I don't know with respect to scooters if it's the same issue of taking away municipal control that we're experiencing all over our policy areas from the state, but it is, you know, we have a role as a government to create an environment in which these scooters can operate safely, in which everyone who's interacting with them, whether they're riding them or not, can be comfortable on the road. And for better or worse, we have to innovate it and create it, and you know, there are no easy answers, and we're going to change it over time as we need to, as problems arise.
So I'd like to ask you all to thank for spending their Saturday us, and I thank you for spending your Saturday with us. Feel free to have coffee and cookies on your way out, and if you have further questions, please come forward.
And don't forget we love our public school flyers.
Yeah, public school flyers.
And those of you who can.
And if you want to contribute to our coffee.
Yeah, those of you who can, we also appreciate help putting the chairs away.